The first snow fell earlier than anyone expected, a quiet whisper across the dry grasslands that stretched for miles around the small frontier town. It melted by noon, leaving nothing but damp earth and a faint unease in the air. Most people laughed it off. Winter always teased before it truly arrived, but Ilara did not laugh. She stood at the edge of her land, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. They looked closer somehow, sharper against the pale sky, as though they were leaning in to watch. The wind carried a different bite now, thin and metallic, and it slipped through her coat like a warning she could not ignore. "They don't see it," she murmured to herself. Behind her, the town bustled as usual. Wagons creaked along the dirt road, children ran between buildings, and the faint sound of hammering echoed from the blacksmith's shop. Life went on, stubborn and ordinary, but Ilara had learned long ago that nature did not care for ordinary. She turned and walked back toward her cabin, her pace steady but urgent. There was no time to waste. Inside, the air smelled of pine wood and earth. Her home was simple. One room, a small hearth, a table scarred by years of use. But beneath it lay something no one else in town had, something no one else believed they needed. She pulled up the heavy wooden hatch set into the floor. A gust of cool air rose from below, carrying the scent of soil and stone. The underground shelter stretched beneath her cabin like a hidden world, carved over months of relentless labor. Reinforced beams lined the walls, shelves stacked with preserved food filled every corner, and barrels of water stood ready. Ilara climbed down the ladder, her lantern casting flickering shadows along the earthen walls. She ran her hand along the beams, checking for any weakness, any sign of moisture. Everything held firm. "It will be enough," she said softly, though doubt lingered at the edges of her mind. It had to be enough. When she first began digging, people had come to watch, some out of curiosity, others out of amusement. "You planning to hide from ghosts down there?" one man had joked, leaning against his wagon, "or bury yourself early?" Another had added with a laugh. Ilara had ignored them. She had seen winters before real winters, the kind that swallowed entire valleys and left nothing but silence behind. She had been a child then, clinging to her mother's hand as the cold crept into their home, as food ran out, as neighbors disappeared one by one. She remembered the stillness most of all, not peace, but absence, the kind that pressed against your ears until you thought you might go mad. She would not live through that again, and she would not die from it. Weeks passed, and the sky grew heavier each day. The sun lingered less and less, slipping behind clouds that never seemed to move. The wind sharpened, cutting across the land with increasing force. Ilara worked tirelessly. She hunted what game she could find, smoked the meat, and stored it below. She gathered roots and herbs, dried them carefully, and packed them into jars. She reinforced her cabin, sealing every crack, layering insulation along the walls. And still the town laughed. At the general store, she tried one last time. "You need to prepare," she told the shopkeeper, a stout man named Harris, who had lived there longer than anyone else. "This winter will be worse than anything you've seen." Harris chuckled as he measured out flour. "You've been saying that since autumn began." "I'm not guessing," Ilara insisted. "The animals are migrating early. The ground froze 2 weeks ahead of time in the northern hills. The wind always blows." He interrupted. "You worry too much." Others in the store nodded in agreement. A woman at the counter smiled politely, though her eyes held a hint of pity. "Winters come and go," she said. "We've managed so far." Ilara clenched her jaw. Not like this. But they had already turned away, their attention drifting back to their own concerns. To them, she was the woman who dug into the earth, who spoke of storms that never came. A cautionary tale, perhaps, or a quiet joke. She left without another word. The second snowfall did not melt. It came at night, thick and relentless, blanketing the land in white by morning. The town awoke to a transformed world, beautiful, silent, and deceptively calm. Children cheered and ran outside, their laughter echoing across the frozen ground. Men shoveled paths between buildings, their breath forming clouds in the air. It was the kind of winter day people remembered fondly. But Ilara saw the signs. The snow was too dense, too heavy. The sky above was not clearing but deepening, layers of gray folding over one another like a gathering storm. And the cold, it was wrong. It did not ebb with the rising sun. It remained, constant and unforgiving. She spent that day moving the last of her supplies underground. By nightfall, her cabin stood nearly empty above ground, everything of value secured below. When the storm arrived, it did not announce itself. There was no distant rumble, no sudden gust, just a gradual intensifying, as though the world itself was tightening. The wind rose first, howling across the plains with a force that rattled walls and tore at roofs. Snow followed, thick and blinding, swallowing everything in its path. Within hours, visibility dropped to nothing. The town disappeared beneath a churning white void. Ilara descended into her shelter and sealed the hatch. The sound of the storm filtered through the earth, a deep, constant roar that vibrated through the walls. She lit her lanterns and sat at the small wooden table she had placed below, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm broth. "This is it," she whispered. Above her, the world vanished, days blurred together, time lost its meaning in the absence of sunlight. Ilara kept track by marking lines on the wall, each one representing a day survived. The storm did not cease. It raged without pause, burying the land under layer upon layer of snow. Buildings collapsed under the weight. Trees snapped like brittle bones. The wind carved deep drifts that swallowed entire structures. In the shelter, Ilara endured. She rationed her food carefully, ate only what she needed, and conserved her energy. She listened constantly, straining for any change in the storm's rhythm. Sometimes she thought she heard voices. Faint, distant cries carried through the earth. She would freeze, her heart pounding, trying to determine if they were real or imagined. Once she climbed halfway up the ladder, her hand hovering near the hatch, tempted to open it. But she stopped herself. To open the hatch would mean letting the cold in, risking everything she had prepared. And if the storm still raged as fiercely as it sounded, stepping outside would be a death sentence. "I warned them," she said, her voice trembling. "I told them." The cries faded. Silence returned, heavier than before. Weeks passed. The storm eventually weakened, though it never truly ended. The wind softened to a low, constant moan, and the snowfall lessened to a steady drift. But the damage had been done. When Ilara finally dared to open the hatch, the effort alone nearly defeated her. Snow had piled high above, compacted into a dense barrier. She dug upward with numb hands, inch by inch, until at last a sliver of pale light broke through. She pushed harder, and the surface gave way. The world she emerged into was unrecognizable. The town was gone. Where buildings once stood, there were only uneven mounds of snow, some marked by the faint outline of a roof or a protruding beam. The roads had vanished entirely, replaced by a smooth, endless expanse of white. The sky was a dull gray, the sun a faint blur behind thick clouds. Ilara stood there, her breath catching in her throat. No. She moved forward slowly, each step sinking deep into the snow. She made her way to where the general store had been. Only a corner of the roof remained visible, the rest buried. She brushed away snow with trembling hands, uncovering part of the door. It would not budge. "Harris," she called, her voice cracking. Harris, no answer came. She moved on, searching desperately, calling out names she knew by heart. Each time the silence answered. Hours passed before she stumbled upon the first sign of life, a hand. It protruded from the snow near what had once been a cluster of homes, fingers stiff and pale. Ilara dropped to her knees, digging frantically, uncovering the body beneath. It was a young man, his face frozen in a grimace, eyes half open. She recoiled, a sob tearing from her chest. "I told you," she whispered. "I told all of you." Grief settled over her like a second storm, heavier than the first. But beneath it, something else stirred, resolve. She could not change what had happened. She could not bring them back. But she could survive. She could carry forward what they had lost. Ilara returned to her shelter and began again. She expanded it, digging deeper, reinforcing the walls further. She gathered what materials she could salvage from the ruins above, repurposing wood and metal. She set traps for the few animals that remained, learned to navigate the frozen landscape with care. The winter lingered, refusing to release its grip, but Ilara endured. And in time, when the first signs of spring finally appeared, a faint trickle of water beneath the ice, a patch of earth revealed by the melting snow, she stood once more at the edge of her land. The mountains no longer loomed as they had before. The wind had softened, carrying with it the scent of something new. She was alone, but she was alive, and this time she would not let the world forget what the winter had taught.